welcome to Phoenix Cinema Podcast. My name's Chris Austin.
I'm Ian Hawks.
And this is a podcast where we discuss what's showing at the historic Phoenix Cinema in North London. And this week, we're discussing Matt Brown's Freud's Last Session, the latest Anthony Hopkins joint based on the play of the same name, in turn based on, or should I say suggested, by the book The Question of God. And what a question it is. Ian, it's good to have you back.
It's really good to be back. I've missed this a lot. I'm also glad you've done your research because I didn't know any of those things that you just said. I'm like, oh, good. This is going to be a much more instructive conversation than now that you're here.
Yeah, I just picked it up off the end credits there. Yeah. Well, I was going to say the reason for Ian's absence last episode is because he was off shooting a movie, a dinosaur movie, in fact. How'd that go?
That's true. It went really, really well. Yeah, I was brought in to help line produce. It's my friend Alessandro Chile. He's a really talented actor and director, and he and his partner are both actors, so they co-wrote this piece together, and it's like Pride and Prejudice meets Jurassic Park. So we filmed a proof of concept for it that we got a grant to go make, and I've seen the trailer, and it looks great, and it's really fun and high drama, and hopefully they get to make it into a feature film. So it was a blast.
Great news. That's fantastic. Well, I'm glad to hear it. And okay, well, speaking of dinosaurs, Ian, what did you think of Anthony Hopkins in this movie?
Oh, shots fired.
Look, I mean, it's a joke. It's a joke.
Of course. So he'd probably get a chuckle out of that. I mean, I think he's amazing. I think he's amazing in just about everything he touches.
Honestly,
this movie was really interesting for me because I don't think it's exactly necessarily my kind of movie. I don't think it blew my socks off, but necessarily I think it might be someone else's more cup of tea. But undeniably, every time Anthony Hopkins is on screen doing anything, I'm enjoying it so much, and I can't look away. And so many little choices, like I have, I have had some older people in my life, grandparents and such, who very intelligent, very sharp people, and then their life starts to get into decline. And this interesting, mixture of there's a sharpness, but then the sharpness suddenly goes away for a second, and then kind of re-engages. And some of the little, the misfiring, phrases and points and jokes that are only funny to them that then just kind of spurt out quickly, but then interspersed with legitimate health experiences, feeling like losing my balance for a moment, or feeling like I just need to stop and think about breathing for a second, or all of that was just perfect. I'm watching him on screen and I'm like, this guy's gonna die in a week. I 100% believe it. And I also believe that he's the smartest person on the planet, which is exactly the brief of what this role needed to be,
100%. Yeah, to the point where I'm honestly thinking, how much of this is a performance?
Yeah, totally.
And how much of it is just, listen, we've got Anthony Hopkins, just roll the cameras, go. Because it's crazy. The man is 87 years old and he is still doing the thing. That's incredible. And actually, I would say his age, like you're saying, it adds to the weight of what they're debating in this movie. Totally. Incredibly. Dude, I honestly, Hopkins is the best part of this. He's one of the most compelling screen actors of all time. We're lucky to still have him.
Yeah, no kidding.
And it's I'm watching it and I'm thinking, what must it be like to be 87 years old and engaging with questions like this? The meaning of life and death, God, legacy. It's just so full. I can only imagine,
Yeah, you almost get the sense that Matthew Good, who's his co-star, you almost get the sense that Matthew Good is just organically reacting to Anthony Hopkins. Anthony Hopkins talking about all these things he's experienced in his life, and just cut to reaction shot of Matthew Good being like, "Wow, you're the most remarkable human being."
Yes.
Surely this is. Can you imagine being offered this role, being so we've got this movie, and it's the entire movie is just you talking to Anthony Hopkins, and he's playing Sigmund Freud. you would say yes, but you would also just be like, I'm just going to sit and watch this person work. You know what I mean? Like
That's exactly right. I mean, no preparation required. You know, I'm C.S. Lewis. Okay, I'll just show up. I'll hit my mark and I'll just react. It's
Totally.
honestly, it's so compelling. What did you? Yeah, so I mean, you mentioned earlier. You said it's usually this kind of movie isn't. You said it isn't quite your cup of tea, or maybe it didn't quite work for you.
I like. My dad's a children's book illustrator, and he's worked on a couple books that have done quite well, but that have been this kind. He worked on a book called The Man Who Made Time Travel that was about like I can't remember the guy's name, but the person who basically invented the clock, the person who figured out how to make clocks work. And he did another book of it. He's essentially these kind of biopics about like really very, very intelligent people who've made a huge kind of impact on history. And for whatever reason, that's like not exactly my cup of tea. I got excited about like two guys in a room kind of on like either side of a debate. Mm-hmm. But I think for me, I was a little... I didn't quite... the question that I kept asking myself that I kind of just wish the film had answered, which is, to me, a quite simple question, is like, why did he want to talk to C.S. Lewis in the first place? Mm-hmm. I never quite grasped that. And I think because I never quite bought into the reality of him being like, here's this C.S. Lewis guy, and I really need to talk to him in the last couple of weeks of my life. I think if I bought into that, even if it was just something almost trivial, but if I'd bought that like Sigmund Freud is like, I need to talk to C.S. Lewis. If I'd bought that, I think I would have been way more on the train of the movie. But I think because I didn't buy it, it almost felt a little too much like... This is maybe going to sound like infantilizing it, but it's almost like when you play with action figures, where you're like, what if this action figure, like, what if like Luke Skywalker and He-Man were like fighting together or something? Like, it almost felt a little bit like we've taken these two people who we love, Sigmund Freud and C.S. Lewis, and we've imagined ourselves, wouldn't it be interesting if they talked to each other? But for me, there wasn't quite enough just like reasons why they should actually be talking to each other. Like there's kind of these comments of like, I don't have a lot of time, and then they seemingly spend the whole rest of the day together. Like these kind of things where I'm just like, I don't quite necessarily buy like what at first when he showed up, I was like, oh, Sigmund Freud's read his book and he has like a bone to pick with him. But then it's like he didn't read his book, or maybe he did, but he doesn't have a bone to pick with him seemingly. I left a little bit being like, I love the performances. I actually like the conceit of the play and the movie, and I guess the book as well. But I guess I just felt myself wishing. I'm more of a when it comes to plot. I think I'm big into kind of like, give me the reason for being here, and then I'm on the train a little bit. And I think I never quite got the reason for like. I didn't buy that these two people should be in a room together for like 8 hours. You know what I mean?
That's fair. Yeah, that's totally fair. I can absolutely see where you're coming from there. And I think it's, I guess I kind of agree with you as well. It's certainly an interesting film. And, well, actually, hold on. Okay, so the word interesting, I have realized upon listening back to all the other episodes, that's my word of the podcast. Interesting. So for this episode, no more interesting. I'm going to switch interesting with appealing. Okay.
Oh, great.
And let's see how that goes. So it's an appealing film. But yeah, I don't think it's entirely successful in what it aims for. I certainly think that the performances are the reason to watch the movie. We've spoken about Anthony Hopkins. Matthew Good is also, he's good.
He's good.
But he's good. But it's the thing about it as well for me is I personally find the idea of like a primarily single location movie with mostly between only two characters that's kind of
your cup of tea.
That's my cup of tea. And there's one thing that while watching this film, I was kind of a little disappointed in how much we break away from that location. It feels, I guess the saying is gilding the lily, but they really do everything they can to just, I guess it's intentional on the filmmaker's part to make it as cinematic as possible and to engage viewers, we have to keep moving. We have to keep flashbacks. We have to, keep cutting away from this space that these two characters are occupying. And on the one hand, I get it. On a cinematic sense, but on the other hand, it felt like it really broke the connection and the momentum between these two and these really fascinating discussions that they're having. It was, I kind of felt that way. Listen, I think the filmmaking is fine, and look, when we do cut away, it's they're good scenes, but I don't know how necessary it was, and maybe actually it kind of makes me more interested in what was the play.
See, I'm the same way. When I finished this, I'm like, I think I probably would have had a better experience if this same cast, same director, even. I have no issue with the directing but I'm like, if you were just in a proscenium, actually had to do it like a play, I actually think I might like this more. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. And it's interesting too, because I wrote a short film recently, One in the Chamber, which is has been shown at the Seattle Film Festival this month, which is pretty cool. And that's only 27 minutes. Thank you. 27 minutes long, one location. Yeah. And it's so appealing to see the difference between, how do you use the space, basically, and to see different filmmakers try different things. And here, I thought it was so interesting that Matt Brown he opened the space. I mean, they are constantly moving. They're sitting behind the desk, then they're in the garden, then they're in the kitchen, and then at one point, let's go and leave. We're going to go and walk the dog. We're going to... You never stay still. And I think that constant motion makes for something... I don't know. Yeah, it makes it, I guess, more visually appealing. Or what do you think about that? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it certainly gives you more, to see. I guess I don't know if it necessarily strengthens the argument. I almost think it maybe distracts a little bit from the core maybe question of the film, which is kind of like these two kind of ideological powerhouses that are kind of a little bit at odds with each other, but also have goodwill for each other. And I think I think it kind of distracts from that a little bit to then have to be like, why are we in the kitchen now, and why are we over here, and why, some of that stuff almost, I think, took away from it. And I wish, I got thinking about, there's a tiny scene. It's very weird to bring up this movie because they're completely opposite movies. But there's a tiny scene in The House That Jack Built by Lars von Trier, where
haven't seen.
He's in any case. Basically, there's a serial killer who's having a conversation with Homer, like the Greek poet, who's basically trying to get him to talk about his guilt and why he's a serial killer. But there's this great little thing where they cut away to, he gives an explanation for why he does what he does, and he talks about walking along a sidewalk and there's street lamps, and the film cuts to animation, almost like oil painting animations, to kind of illustrate what he's talking about. And it makes what he's talking about so clear, but for whatever reason I think really keeps it in the world of an intellectual debate, where you're kind of it's not like they're out walking on the sidewalk and he's saying, well, when I'm walking under the lamps, I think about this. It's no, these guys are trapped in this room across a desk from each other, but their minds are conjuring up images. And I almost found myself wishing it was a little bit more like that, because then I think I also would have bought them. I think the whole movie could have just been an hour and a half that they spent together. You know what I mean? But if you wanted to bring in visuals, if there was a way for us to have objects on the desk or animations, or if there was a way to maybe have it be like we're diving further into their heads instead of pulling out of their heads a little bit, I think that could have been an interesting choice. But that I don't know. It's always hard to kind of give suggestions to a film, but that was something I found myself thinking about a little bit.
For sure, and I think I'm with you on this. I'm thinking, hey, how much more appealing would it have been to just have them in this room? And sure, if we want to branch off and do some interesting, some appealing visual things, that in terms of just sort of emphasizing or even more expanding what they're talking about, fine. But if they were just in this space, oh my God, I think I would have like really leaned in. I mean,
well,
really.
And it's a cool room. Like there's already cool. The opening of the film, they have all these insert shots of cool stuff in the room, and I almost found myself wishing, like, well, I wish I knew why does he have this weird chess set on his table? That seems interesting. Or why, I almost think it would have been fascinating to take the actors and put them in the space, fill it with fascinating props, and then just do like a week of rehearsals where we figure out, well, what are ways that we can use these things to illustrate? Again, I mean, that's the workflow you go through when you're doing a play. You know what I mean? Of just what's the ways that we can kind of take what we have within this one space and use it to illustrate these different turns of emotions and things like that. No, I think I agree with you. But it's interesting. I find the other thing I'll say is, well, I want to get your opinion on what you think at the end of the film. What like your takeaway was. Maybe I'll ask that first, and then I'll talk about what my thoughts.
Well, the ending feels kind of conflicted to me, and maybe that's the point. The point. It also, this movie is, I felt like it doesn't know how to end, to be very honest. I think there were a couple of moments where we could have been like, okay, and fade to black. Oh no, okay, we're still going. and then eventually it ends on this image that I think is fairly weak, in my opinion. It's not terrible, but it's weak, I think. I don't know. It's very the character that Matthew Good plays, C.S. Lewis. He has this moment, right, on the train at the very end of the film where he's half dreaming, and it feels in this dream like he enters this state of bliss and acceptance and comfort with what they've been talking about. And then there's this loud noise that wakes him up, and he immediately feels disturbed and uncomfortable, and maybe feeling that claustrophobia that he experienced in the war. And that's how we leave him, feeling uncertain. And then knowing that Freud ended his life only a couple of weeks, as they're theorizing after this conversation. It's all very dark, and it's all very, I don't know. It can't, the movie's kind of saying, listen, I don't know. and I kind of left it not feeling strongly one way or another either. I didn't have any sort of breakthrough epiphany moment, or I didn't leave feeling either one way or the other, if that makes any sense. It was just like a kind of a shrug.
Yeah. I agree with you. And it was tough for me because I'm sure that the source material also wants you to leave feeling conflicted, which I think is great. I mean, sure, you have a conversation between two people who are, both brilliant in their fields and very convicted in what they do. So, like, yeah, you shouldn't leave being like, yes, God exists. Like that would ruin the movie. You know what I mean? But I do agree that, like, I wanted to leave, I think, maybe feeling a heightened maybe understanding of either myself or my experience on Earth or something like that. You'd think like, oh, you get two of these really wonderful people or amazing people together, and surely they can uncover maybe some pearls or a new perspective on something that I haven't seen. And I think maybe I don't understand like Freudian, psychoanalysis well enough, but like I felt like there were moments where maybe like the soundtrack was telling me that like I should be having like feelings, but then it often had to do with his relationship with his daughter was kind of a lot of times like the big drama moments, which again, if that's the case, I almost found myself being like, if you want to, that relationship sounds fascinating and very interesting. And I found myself being like, oh, like I maybe I want a movie about that. If that's going to be the story I want to tell, like I'd love to see a 2-hour movie about like Freud's relationship with his daughter, who is like in, children's psychoanalysis and all this. That sounds fascinating. And
I totally agree. Yeah.
But it's kind of like, it was almost like the high drama moments we cut away from C.S. Lewis and Freud, and then when we were kind of back with them, I didn't really have any of these kind of big, kind of cathartic moments, which I found a little disappointing, I guess, for a movie that I think ultimately at the premise is kind of like, whoa, you get these two guys in a room together, like sparks are gonna fly. Yeah.
I mean, I watched it yesterday with Carrie Ann, with my girlfriend, and we left, and our conversation was not about the weight of what they've been discussing. Instead, it was more technical. It was about the performances.
Right.
And I'm really thinking, I'm with you in that. Should it have been? Because, listen, the question of God and what they're discussing is universal. I mean, listen, just the other day, Carrie Ann was asked me if I'm religious or something, and I said, yeah, kind of, and she was like, what? I had no idea. And I was like, well, yeah, and then it got into this whole discussion. So it really should have connected, and I think in a much stronger way, that it just, it didn't, I guess.
And I think maybe as somebody who has done, I mean, I know very little about Freud, to be fair. I've never really read anything from Freud or researched them that much. But I've read a fair amount of C.S. Lewis. I grew up, very Christian, and I'm interested in kind of his worldview on stuff. And so, like, I think I was kind of waiting for... Yeah, I almost wanted it to be like Meteor. I wanted it to be like, if we're going to debate religion, let's debate religion. Let's get into it. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, if that's what this movie's about, then please let's get into it. And it felt like it always was holding me like a little bit at arm's length. And there was an interesting thing. Tell me, I want to know if you agree with this. It almost felt like so the title, I didn't know anything about the film going into it, so I didn't know C.S. Lewis was going to be a part of it at all. So I didn't even know Christianity was going to be a part of it at all. So I went into it thinking it's going to be a film about Freud and psychoanalysis. C.S. Lewis enters the picture, and I'm like, oh, fascinating. And then it's almost like I feel like the filmmakers, I think, were almost in the perspective of C.S. Lewis a little bit more. I say this just because it feels like we're almost like, from C.S. Lewis, kind of observing him, and there's almost this, like, I felt like, at least there's almost like this smile on his face sometimes of like, okay, like you can say what you want, but like it was almost, rather than like C.S. Lewis explaining why he believed what he believed, it was almost more just kind of reaction shots of him being like, huh, and it almost felt to me, and maybe I'm projecting, that like we as the audience are supposed to be like, almost like, oh yeah, all C.S. Lewis has to do is kind of smile and say a thing, and we kind of nod and be like, oh yeah, I understand where that kind of comes from. It was almost, to me, it almost felt a little bit more like Freud was the other, and C.S. Lewis was kind of the understandable factor, which I think makes sense, I think, to some degree, but I think maybe just threw me off a little bit, because I went into the film being like, it's a film all about Freud, we're going to be like in like Freud's headspace, and then I kind of like, going into the film, I was a little bit like, oh, like this seems like I'd be very curious to know the filmmaker's relationship with like C.S. Lewis or with Christianity or something. Because as we were watching it, and maybe it's just because I'm projecting, but I felt like I was getting these little like dings that like triggered my feelings of like, oh, I think this is supposed to play well for a Christian audience. And I don't know. But again, that's maybe just me projecting on it. I felt like it totally, like, it didn't go as hard on like Christianity to some degree as I expected a little bit, and I felt like C.S. Lewis didn't have to defend himself too much. He could kind of just like smile and be like, you can believe what you want, you know what I mean? Which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I didn't even really think about that myself, but having just seen the film yesterday, I completely see where you're coming from. Do you think that it may possibly be anything to do with the fact that it's Anthony Hopkins playing Freud, and that alone makes him more of like a larger than life, mysterious kind of deity almost?
Sure, no, that's fair.
To potentially,
yeah, that's fair. Like if like Philip Seymour Hoffman was playing C.S. Lewis, I'd probably be like, that C.S. Lewis guy's really interesting. You know what I mean? Not to hit on like Matthew Good, but it's like,
not at all.
It's like, yeah. It's just when the two of them are in a room, it's like one of them is kind of the actor with an uppercase A, just based off of his experience.
100%, just based on legacy. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. That's interesting.
Did you have
You're right.
Did you have any thoughts about what you would pair this with, Ian?
It's interesting. Like I said, I don't actually watch too many. I watch fewer plays than I probably should, and don't watch too many movies that kind of play out like this. The movie I'll pair it with is it's Ordette by Carl Theodor Dreyer, who's a favorite director of mine, a Danish director. This movie came out in the 50s.
What's it called? Sorry?
Ordette. O-R-D-E-T.
Ordette.
Yeah, it's a Danish word that just means the word. But it's a fascinating film about a family that's religiously at odds with each other. And there's like a child in the family, a grown, I mean, he's like in his 20s, but one of the kids in the family who thinks that they're kind of like a prophet. And then there's also someone dying in the family, and it leads to all these kind of conversations and experiences around faith and death and things.
Sticky.
and has some really that thing. The reason I kind of bring it up is because that thing where you said like, well, we end with this ambiguous thing, but it's not an ambiguous thing that makes me like that excited or interested.
Yeah.
This one ends with, it's a little less ambiguous, but it ends with certain scenes that are kind of not explained to you, but that really are like, you know, this God could really be very real, or God really could be very not. And there's something about the way that that Ordette weaves that tapestry that by the time you get to the end, it does hit you really hard. At least it hit me really hard of being like, oh wow, like yeah, it's interesting. It's a cool film. Yeah, I think you'd like it.
That sounds cool. Who's the director again?
Carl Theodor Dreyer. He also did like Passion of the Joan of Arc, and he did what's that other film of his that's pretty. He's a big Danish director. He started making films in the silent era and stuff, and then made films up through the 50s and 60s. Gertrude and Day of Wrath are some of his other films. Yeah.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you. Yeah, I'll definitely check that out. That sounds great, man.
What about you?
Well, immediately I thought of the movie The Sunset Limited. Have you heard of it?
No, I've never even heard of this movie.
It's based on a play by Cormac McCarthy, actually, and then Cormac McCarthy adapted the screenplay of it. It's directed by Tommy Lee Jones, and there's only two people in the cast, Tommy Lee Jones and Samuel L. Jackson. And I think it was just an HBO movie. It was a TV movie. It only aired on HBO.
Yep.
And it's a fascinating movie about, they just enter an apartment that Samuel L. Jackson owns, and they have an entire conversation, and it just takes place in this space. And the concept is, they were both on a train platform waiting for a train that I believe is called the Sunset Limited. And Samuel L. Jackson witnessed Tommy Lee Jones trying to jump or getting ready to jump in front of the train. And he talked him off of the ledge. And now they've gone back to Samuel L. Jackson's apartment to talk about why he did what he did, and to talk about God, and to talk about whether there's a reason for all of this. And it is super cool. Ian, you, of all people, I would really want you to watch this.
I like Cormac McCarthy a lot. The fact that he like actually wrote the script is really appealing to me. Yeah, and honestly, I actually think they go much further in terms of what they're discussing than Freud's Last Session did, in my opinion. And it also ends in a place where you're like, it's uncertain, but I won't give anything away. But it looks cool. I mean, and Tommy Lee Jones, Samuel Jackson, you can't say no to that. I mean, that sounds like an amazing pairing. Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well,
cool.
Thank you so much, Ian. I guess we'll wrap it up there for this one. I want to give a special thanks to Phoenix Cinema, who continue to program such diverse and always appealing films. Our music is by Stefan Krieger, and our episodes are edited by Noah Anderson. Hey guys, if you want to go watch a movie, head to the Phoenix Cinema, and I will meet you there.